Hello everybody and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. I have now released a tutorial on how to create a space scene in which you will have a planet, asteroids rotating around it, a star system, the sun pretty much, volumetrics that help build up the scene even further. Quite a few people have requested that I would do a tutorial on this and how I set it up together. It's not very complicated. I'm going to show you quite a few steps of how to put it together based on knowledge that I've acquired in the past few weeks on putting my own scene together. I have also found a way to create asteroids that do have self-shadowing and also cast shadows within the scene as well. As previously I was using Niagara and that proved to be quite challenging. But yeah, I'm using an asteroid field that's using nanite meshes. So in the respect of actually using the scene itself is it's very performant. At a runtime, it runs a bit slow because I'm using an insane amount of asteroids within the scene because I am creating this for a science fiction movie that I'm working on. This is going to be part of my opening scene. Now, for about 10 minutes of this video, I will be discussing about how the scene is put together, what are all the elements of it and how it functions. And then after that, we're going to go through the details of how to create certain parts of it. This is going to be part one of the video in which we set up the planet. We set up an atmosphere and the star system around it. But then we are going to move into part two, where we're going to be looking at doing more complicated things such as the asteroid field and clouds and cloud shadows on the planet itself. So yeah, I know it's a bit of a long video, but it does go into quite a bit of depth as to how to create everything from scratch. And by the end of this tutorial, you will be able to create this entire system, this planet system within less than 2 hours tops. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. If you have any suggestions to make, please go forward with them. I am really looking at improving my scene even further, as you've seen in these renders. So there's much room for improvement, but without any more delays, let's begin. So the way I would like to start doing this work is basically deconstructing the scene that I've created so far. And this will help us to understand how I've made this entire setup. Now I do have a sequence in here that basically can play out, and we can see some of the elements, you know, how the cameras move around, and then how the sort of effects that you see on the screen, the volumetric effects, which I know they seem a bit jittery on the screen right now as the camera moves, but when you do actually create a render out of this, that problem is mitigated because every frame is sampled correctly when you do a render. And this is done via adding a volumetric particle into what you can see here. I've got these cameras which are blueprints, and basically each of these cameras act as a blueprint. It contains the volumetric within the blueprint plus the camera, so they're attached to each other, so wherever the camera goes also the volumetric will follow. Now you'll notice that the asteroids themselves are not moving at all while this sequence plays, and that is because I have not pressed the play button on the screen on Unreal Engine. But if I would press the play button, basically what would happen, the asteroids would start moving. So as you can see, when I move out of the camera positions that I've got set up, so that's, you know, one camera, 2 cameras and 3 cameras. When I move out of those areas, there is no longer this volumetric light because that, as I said, is attached to the camera and not to the viewport camera. Now if I press play over here on the screen, now you can see the asteroids are starting to move, and the performance starts to drag down quite a bit because although all of these asteroids are nanite, this calculation of movement of all of these asteroids is really taking a toll on the performance of the scene. So when I stop the animation, you know, stop playing the level, basically the performance is now back to normal. But what you have to understand is I am using a large quantity of these asteroids. So As you can see, this is the first one. It's massive, and this is generated via a blueprint. And then I've got a second one, and then a third one, fourth and fifth one. So this is just to add a lot more chunkiness to the whole scene. There are a lot of asteroids in here, and I'm sure depending on how you want to set up your cameras or what you want to use it for, you can definitely use a lot less meshes. Now, as I said, these are all nanites, so if we switch over to triangles, you can see that all of them are actually calculated as nanite. The performance drop doesn't come from the actual meshes themselves, but it comes from the movement that's being calculated via these blueprints, and also the fact that there are shadows in here and volumetrics as well to move at the same time. But normally, you could create this with a Niagara system as well if you want to, but then you will have the problem that I have faced in this render that I've made here, where you can see that the meteorites, the asteroids themselves, don't have any good shadows to them, because they only have a bit of self shadow, and even that is not accurate. They cast no shadow whatsoever on the world, and so or on themselves. So basically, they're not useful to us. But in my example here, if I start moving the sun around, so Control L and start moving the sun, you can see how the shadows are actually working perfectly on these meshes, because they're just an instance mesh across the whole board, and they can, as I said, they've got self shadow, and they also cast shadows in the scene, which makes it a lot more of a realistic scene. So let's begin just deconstructing all of these elements that I've put together. Okay, so and now you'll see that there's this sort of weird looking sun glare over here. The reason why I've got it is because it adds a bit more sort of volumetric into the scene, and it helps with the scene build up when you are actually using the cameras that you set up. Now, if you don't want that, you can just go into the exponential height and start removing it. But let's just start deconstructing the scene, like I've said previously. Basically, we've got these 5 blueprints over here that generate all the asteroids, and I'm going to show you how to set up one of these, which is, it's quite of a complicated process in the sense of there's quite a few things to be added in the blueprint, but we will get through together, and you'll see it's not that complicated once you start laying the foundations down. So this is one blueprint that we're going to create. Then I've got the camera. Again, that's just the camera blueprint, but you can just use a normal camera if you want to. You don't have to do what I've done here with a volumetric attached to it. That's really up to you. Then we've got a directional light, and the directional light is just set up at a very low intensity, 0.2. And then, I've just done the settings in such a way that it helps my scene. We obviously want to have shadows and so on turned on, but I haven't really done anything to the directional light apart from light shaft occlusions. So I've turned those on with some occlusion depth and some bloom, and I've done this because I wanted to have these sort of rays of light as you move through the asteroids, which I think adds a lot of quite a lot of I would say a very nice atmosphere, but this only works if you have a volumetric in here. So if I get close to the planet, as you can see, there are the light shafts and the bloom, which for some reason seems to be working even with those off. Oh yeah, I think it's just because purely it's just how the atmosphere works. But now that I've got these on here, they will also work with the volumetrics, like I've told you. Otherwise, they wouldn't. So I can't really get the effect to pop up very nicely here, just because I don't have a lot of a big enough volumetric effect within the scene. As you can see, it's only at that point. But my use of the exponential height fog, which you can see in the level as well, is to make those setups here for the cameras to work. So this is why I've got the volumetric, because if I deactivate it, as you can see, there are no more volumetric effects within the scene. Okay, so I've also got the planet. Let me just get out of this camera. So this is the planet over here, and the planet is using a texture that I've got from this website, which is a Mars 8K texture. I can also, I know how to generate, create my own planets by procedurally generating them, but in this particular case, I've just used the Mars texture on top of a sphere. The Saturn ring is also from here, so maybe you can't really notice it, but there is a ring in there. So if I deactivate these blueprints, you should be able to see the ring. And the ring itself is using an opacity mask to decrease the intensity of the actual ring when you see it, and also has a depth of field fade, so that when you have meshes around it, it actually blends quite well, and you'll see what I mean when we get to that step. And then we've got over here on the planet, I've also got these are clouds over the planet. So that's just how I added those clouds, and they're just got a panner within the scene to just turn around. I haven't yet removed the cast shadow on this, so the asteroids are actually casting shadow on the planet. You wouldn't really want that, so I'll just have to remove it. And this is a shadow that I've added underneath the clouds, so it just gives a bit more depth to those shadows. Then we've got a post-process effect that just darkens the space around us and just helps with building up the scene a lot better. Again, adds a film grain and so on, but this is just purely up to your preference. Then we've got the sky atmosphere, which is obviously adding the atmosphere around the planet, and I'm going to show you how to set that up. I've also got a skylight, doesn't really play much of a role in this, and then I've got a star system, which is just a dome around this area with a star system map, which I believe I've got from here somewhere as well, so we can find that texture in here as well. Anyway, but yeah, that's the breakdown of the scene. What we're gonna do, we're gonna create a new level and just start building it up from scratch, starting with the basics, where we're going to add our planet atmosphere, lights, volumetrics, and then we'll move on to the more let's say complicated part of this whole thing, which is to create the asteroids. So the first thing we want to do now is we want to create a new map. So I'm just going to create a new level and just call it space tutorial. And then I'm going to double click it, and this will open my new map. Now, as you can see, it's actually completely blank, and that's because we have no lights or anything like that in the scene. So we can go over into window, and then over here select environment light mixer. In here we can create a skylight, an atmospheric light, a sky atmosphere, and that's it, because these two we wouldn't need them. So we don't need any volumetric clouds because we're not creating a landscape, we're creating a planet. So now we're going to have a look at our scene. There's nothing in here because there is nothing that light can be casted on, so we have to create an object. So I'm going to create a sphere. If you haven't yet activated your modeling in Unreal Engine, just go to plugins and enable it. This will ask you to restart the engine. Do that, that's fine. But then you're going to have modeling tools inside Unreal Engine 5 or 4, both of them have it. So then you can press this button over here and you want to create a sphere. So let's try with a sphere type A. So once you press it, you want to select certain certain parts in here. So we want our pivot to be centered, and then everything else could actually just stay the same. And then we just press somewhere within the scene, which has now added the sphere. We can press complete and go back to where we were. Now, if I press F, this will center me around the sphere. That's our sphere over there in the world. Let me just decrease the speed. We're moving way too fast. So that's the sphere that we've added within the world. And this sphere, if we go over into the transform panel, we can actually start increasing its scale. So let's just take it over to about 1000. Because I've got my lock turned on, this scales 1000 in all directions, not just that one axis. Now, if you look at the sphere itself, you can see that it's a bit low poly, so it may not actually be what we need. So we're actually going to go back into our modeling and then have a look at maybe sphere type B and see if that's any better. Normally, you'd have to look at the subdivisions levels. So in this particular case, let's try with 128. And then I've just pressed my button into the scene, and this should have added the sphere. And as you can see, this is how the UVs are laid out. Now this is not going to work with our texture, because if you have a look on the website that I've showed you before, these textures are actually going to need a sphere like what we generated the first time, which was sphere type A. So this is why I'm showing you this, because it's very important that you actually get this right. So you've got these slices on the sphere, so you've got to maybe create So I'm just going to go for 128 by 128. Again, centered, and I'm just going to add it within the scene. Now, this is a far more smoother sphere than what we had previously. Make sure it's actually centered into our world, and then we can have a look at it. Increase it to 1000 for now. And when you press F, as I said, it just takes you out into this, it takes you outside of it. So let's just have a look. I'm not really sure why I can't see the sun, but I think I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to see it once we turn some of the settings up. So the directional light, you've got to make sure that it's actually set up as a light source that's affecting the whole world. It's affecting the atmosphere. So you want to go over down here. Where was it now? There we go. So you've got cast shadow, cast cloud shadows, cast shadows like that. And this is our, as I said, this is our sphere over here. We want to go to the sky atmosphere as well, and then we want to decrease the radius to, let's say, 10. And 10 is still too big. That's our light. That's our sun over there. So the sky atmosphere was actually blocking our sun. So we want to turn this down to maybe a 2 or a 3. Let's try a 1, and it's still too big for our sphere, but that's fine. I'm just going to increase the size of this panel. With the atmosphere, we want to select over here planet center at component transform. So this is now, the sky atmosphere is now centered around our world origin, but it's still too big. So what I would suggest instead is we take our sphere and we make that bigger. Let's just try 2000, and as you can see, 2000 is exactly the size to be as big as our sky atmosphere. But still, the sky atmosphere looks very weird. It's like it's massive, basically. So we've got some settings over in here, which is that's the ground radius. Then you have a height, so you can turn that down, and you can see what's happening over here. This is how big the atmosphere is going to be, but it just doesn't look right. We've got some other settings in here to make it look a bit better, but you've got this exposure, this exponent setting. All these things will be done based on your preferences within what you're trying to do. But right now, it's not looking right. So what I would suggest is go and add a shape, which is like a cube. Right, make the cube the same size as the sphere, and now as you can see the cube is quite big. We're gonna move the cube where the sphere is, rotate it so you can see its side like that, and now we can see our sphere casting a shadow over on the cube, which is great. That's what we want. Now let's put the cube further back, maybe somewhere around that point. And now select the sphere and let's add 20,000. Obviously the sphere is massive, the cube is inside of it right now, so we're just going to have to bring the cube out and maybe make it a bit bigger, like that. Okay, so why did I do that? Well, as you can see, there is no longer, at this scale, there is no longer a shadow being casted on the cube. Now this is a massive problem, because the only way you're going to get any shadow sort of casted on that is if you get close enough. And no amount of settings will help you to further increase these shadows, at least none that I can find. So what you want to do at this point, you want to start scaling down. So the sphere could probably scale it down to 1000. And then our cube, as you can see, it's now capturing the shadow from the sphere. So this is how far you can go with the camera before the shadows start to disappear. Now this is important if you want your planet to properly cast shadows on your asteroids, your meteors or whatever. So that's why you want to test this out. So we can now delete the cube. This is probably the size that we want to keep for our planet. Now we can start increasing the ground radius of this. And it's important that you increase it to the point where it's actually perfectly aligning with the planet. So that's it. That's number 5 for me in here. Now what I can do is I can look at the atmosphere height. I can look at the exponent, so I could turn the exponent down to maybe like a 0.6, and then the atmosphere height could go, could be higher or it could be lower. The more, as you can see, the more I push it out, the more it fades outside. So we now have volumetric over in here, by the way. So whatever debris you're going to have around here is going to create light rays and so on, just like what you see. Normally, this sky atmosphere would be far higher, the ground radius would be far higher, and that would help with mitigating sort of this effect with a sharp edge. So what you want to do now is basically play with the settings until you find something that really works quite well for your scene. So 0.2 is not enough. Let's try 0.3, something like that. And what we want to do now, as you can see, we want to take the scattering down to 0.1 is too much. Maybe something like that. So normally you start playing around with the settings. Yeah, no, I'm just gonna take this down to 0 for now. This is gonna be okay. I do have a proper sort of atmosphere showing up right now, which is quite nice. So this is now set up. We want to start adding the textures over into our planet, and also the sky dome. But there are other things that we can do first as well. So for example, we can take the intensity of the light to a 0.2. That's what I like to take it to. 0.2 might not be enough for you, but that's really, up to preferences. 0.5 is also okay if you want to use that. But so far, this is what we've got, and let's move on to texturing. Now what you need to notice is that in our folder where we created the map, we have a new folder called generated. If you go into the generated folder, you'll see that these are the meshes that have been generated via this modeling editing mode. So our sphere is the one ending in FEA, so we can actually take these two and delete them. We don't need them anymore. And this is basically our planet. You can't even rename it. Let's just call it planet. And unfortunately, we're going to have to rename it within here as well. Now, let's go over onto the website where we've got all of these sort of meshes. And these textures. And I'm going to download the 8K Saturn. So save image as, I'm going to download it in my downloads folder. And then I'm going to take the ring as well. So I am going to save image as and put it over as well. I think we might want some clouds. So I'm just going to take the Earth clouds just so I can show you how, the clouds can be applied as well. And then also we could have a look at how we can apply some shadows to these clouds. One thing to note as well is that, oh look, there's the stars plus Milky Way, so we can actually get that if we want to. So I'm going to download that as well, which is going to help us with setting up the scene even more. One thing that you need to know is that this texture for Saturn doesn't have any normal. So you have a normal map for Earth, but you don't have a normal map for Saturn. So you're going to have to create that on your own in Photoshop, or try and sort of, I would say force it through. I'll show you what I mean when we get there. But now we've got the textures. I'm just going to open a file explorer, go into my downloads, and I'm going to bring all these textures in here. Obviously the system has now imported them, and we want our Saturn texture. We want to create a new material, and we'll just leave it like that for now. But what we want to do is over into our planet, we want to add the Saturn material. And if we have a look, the Saturn material has now been applied, again with no normal, so it doesn't look too great, unfortunately. But there are things that we can do. So if we double click and we open the material, let me just shut down. Yeah, so I've got the material over into here. Let me just bring this over to the side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my original work that I've done so far. and I am going to open the Earth material, if I can find it. There we go. And I'm going to copy some nodes from here. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I don't want us to start putting it together from scratch if there's no need to. So what I'm showing you over in here, I've actually generated a normal of the Mars texture because that's what I wanted to do in that particular sort of setup. But what I want to do is, let me just go over into the material over in here. I want to create this, I wanted to copy this normal intensity sort of node. So I'm just going to bring it over into here. And what this is doing, it's basically taking the texture, which now I need to change it over to the Saturn one. Let me just find that. I'm gonna try and tank it this way, you know, like just using this texture and see what happens. So I've just put the base color texture, and I've got a parameter, a normal intensity parameter. It's just a number really, and 1 minus x node going into a flattened normal, and then that can go into the normal node over here. Now let's apply and see what has happened. So if we have a look, it's actually not done. It's not done a very good job, unfortunately. One thing that we can do to mitigate that problem, let me just go back into where I have created, sorry, where was that? That was over in here, maps. This is where I've created the tutorial files. So this is the material. Let me just open that again. What I need to do to this material is I need to create a material instance. So right click it, create material instance, and then we can add that over into our planet. Now if we double click the material instance, we can play with the intensity of the normal, and if we switch that over to a 1, you can see that it's starting to show us something, yeah? But as I said to you, this is not ideal because this is not actually a normal, unfortunately. This is just a base color file. So you do need to generate a normal for this if you really want to fix that, and you can do that through Photoshop. So in Photoshop, all we need to do is go over into Filter, 3D, and generate normal map. And this will automatically create a normal map for us, but you've got to play around with these settings. So you want to turn this over into maybe 120%. I'm not really sure why it's doing that. There we go. So what about, yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? If I press the button, so if I use a slider, it works okay, but if I press the button, it just messes it all up. Right, so this is our normal map that we generated from this texture, and we can now export, sorry, we don't need to export, Photoshop is all about saving. So 8K Saturn, and I'm just gonna type in normal. Don't worry about my naming convention, not to mention that I've actually messed it up because I pressed save, but I didn't actually one second, press save, yeah, okay, large file, okay, now it's saved, and this is our texture. So I'm just going to drag this over into my content browser over in here. Let me just go back into our material. So bear in mind, like I said to you, this node is literally just so I'm just going to select that texture, and let me just go over into here and use it. So that's the texture. So this node just allows us to intensify our normal. So I've just pressed OK, I pressed apply. Let's just have a look. This is our normal looks like, and in our over in here we can actually play around if we want a higher intensity or a lower intensity. I'm just going to go for a 0.5, and that should be a good enough intensity for this particular scene. So this material, as I've said, normal intensity, flatten, normal, and then over into the normal node. Now, other people may actually, look at this and be like, well, I want to have a higher, I want to have a planar, or I want this sort of planet to move. You wouldn't want to rotate the planet. You can rotate the texture itself. So in the material that I showed you guys earlier, which I don't know if I've got, I've still got it open. So if you look over in here, I did use a panner. So this panner, as you can see, it goes into a million different textures. That's because I've got so many different sort of ways of doing things that are generally not necessarily finished. But I was using a decal, so sorry, not a decal, parallax occlusion mapping. But in this particular case, we're not going to need to do that. I'm just going to copy these nodes from here, and I can add them over in here. Then I can put the coordinates of the panner into both of the V's of the normal and the texture sample. And now I'm going to press apply. Let's close this material. And what you'll see right now, nothing is really happening. If we double click the material instance, we've now got a speed. So if we see that, put it to 1, and it's now rotating like crazy. So we probably want the 0. That's not 0.01. No, still too fast. So 0.001 is still spinning the planet at a far lower rate. But as I said, this planet is rotating. We may want to increase our height of our atmosphere. It's just not, it's not bleeding out enough sort of. Let me just try and play around with these settings. It's not bleeding enough atmosphere out there. So 0.6. Yeah, there we go. So again, you can see the atmosphere that we've got. That's looking quite well. Okay, so what else do we want to do? Well, we can take our planet that we've created, and we can press Ctrl W to duplicate it, and we can then rename this to a star system. Yeah. And then the size of this star system, we've obviously got to make it quite large. So this is now occupying the entire area of our sort of site. The sun is blocked up and everything else is blocked as well. We need to create a new material for this. So I'm just going to create a new material and call it M star system. I'm then going to double click it, and what I want to do is I want to create our Milky Way texture over into here, and then we just hook this up to the base color, click the material itself, and make sure you've got two-sided on, and then press apply. Now if we go back into our scene, again you can't see anything because there's no light sort of shining in here, unfortunately. So we need to mitigate that. We need to make this material allow for light to penetrate it without obscuring it in any possible way. So in order for the star system to ignore the sun to ignore the star system, we want our our material. Why did I say landscape? I have no idea. We want our material to be switched over to unlit to begin with, and this doesn't allow us to use the base color anymore. So we want to drag this over into the emissive color instead, but we've got to tell Unreal Engine that it needs to allow the light to pass through. So we're going to search for a node called Sky Atmosphere Light Scattered Luminance. That's what it's. Sorry, light disk luminance. Why? I'm just saying the wrong thing all the time today. Right, so once we have that node in there, we can then put a add node over in here, and we can connect our luminance over into the A node. Then we want to add a multiply node in front, and we will need to connect our texture over into it, and then a parameter into the multiply. This then goes into our B slot over of the add node, and this goes into the emissive color. With that done, we want to add a texture coordinate. This is just going to help us to, in order if we want to expand on the, use the UVs in a different way. So I'm just going to create a new parameter, and then I'm going to convert this, I'm going to convert it to a parameter. I'm going to call it size. And I'm going to add a multiply node here as well and connect the texture coordinate and the size over into each node and put that into our UVs. Now, as I've said, this over here has to be a parameter on its own as well. So we're just going to call that brightness. Okay. And we can give it a default value of 1 and this size a default value of 1 as well. And then we can press apply, and then we can have a look over into our, over here into our scene. I still can't see anything. So let me just browse over to this material. I've got my my content browser over on this side, so that's why sometimes they just don't show up, because I've got it on a different monitor. I'm actually finding it very difficult to run with the 1080p monitor. Right, so with the star system selected, let's now create a material instance of our star system, and then we can drag that in on top of this. And now you can see we've got, what's it called? So there shall be light. So that's it. We've got a light now. I think it's too strong, so the effect of the brightness itself is probably way too strong. So a 0.1 brightness works far better than using 1. And for some reason it has affected my planet, so we need to obviously work with that and sort and resolve it. Okay, so we've got in order to fix this, basically the star system itself, we've got to take the cast shadow option off. So now the star system is no longer casting any shadows, meaning that the light is not creating a shadow from the star system onto our planet, which is great. So that's now working properly. We also want to add a cinematic effect, a visual effect, which is a post-process volume. And somewhere way down, you've got an option called infinite extent. If you press that button, now the post-process, it doesn't matter where it is within the world, it will affect the entire world. And the reason why I've added the post-process to begin with is because I want to go over to bloom and change the method from standard to convolution, which this will give us a more realistic sun glare. If you want, over in here you can also start adding other effects, such as a dirt lens flare, a film grain. So for example, I like to go for a 0.2 or 0.3 sort of film grain, something like that. I don't know if you want that. I myself use the vignette effect as well, because it just helped with building up that scene even further. So what we've done in this video, we basically created the planet, we created an atmosphere, which again, you've got countless of options if you want to extend it, make it bigger, make it, whatever you want to do with it. We added our lights, we created our planet that also spins around. In the next video, we'll be exploring creating the asteroid fields, and also the clouds and shadows from the clouds, and then the volumetrics around the asteroid fields as well, to make them look a lot more cinematic. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. So I hope you guys really enjoyed that and you found it useful. Please leave a like and subscribe to my comment if you did. Please let me know if you have any suggestions or if you have any improvements to suggest to me. I'm still developing this. I'm still working on creating a very good space sort of environment for my science fiction movie. So any ideas you have, please throw them my way and I'll see what I can do to implement them. But thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in part 2 of this tutorial. Thank you.